The wind carried the taste of ash and dust, whipping across the scorched plains like an invisible specter. Eli lay sprawled beside the crumbling remains of his homestead, his coat tattered and soaked with sweat, the leather of his gloves cracked and dry. He clutched a small vial of dark liquid, his final medicine, and let the last of his strength seep into it. As if the substance could carry the weight of his regrets, the red sun hovered over the horizon, half hidden by the black smoke of distant fires. The air was thick, brittle with heat, and the world seemed to hold its breath. In the distance, jagged cliffs clawed at the sky, and the skeletal remains of burned barns leaned into the wind like exhausted sentinels. Somewhere far off, a coyote's cry echoed, answering the moans of the wind. That Eli's chest rose and fell in shallow, uneven heaves. His eyes, sunken and bloodshot, flicked toward the path leading down from a mesa. He had heard them before, bounty hunters, ruthless men with iron teeth and faster guns. Their shadows would reach him soon. But something else drew his attention. A small, hunched figure staggering across the cracked earth, fragile against the expanse of desert. The girl, her dress, tattered and stained, clung to her in patches. Her hair, dark as night, fell in tangled waves across her shoulders. She coughed, a dry, hacking sound that tore at the silence. Eli forced himself to sit upright, leaning against the remnants of a burned fence post. His hand shook as he held the vial aloft. She needed it. She needed him. That he remembered the day the sickness first came, how it had taken his family, one by one, leaving him hollow and bitter. He had sworn never to let it claim another life if he could prevent it. And now, facing the end of his own days, he had a chance to make one right choice. One act that could push back the darkness, if only slightly. The girl stumbled closer, her bare feet cutting shallow tracks in the dirt. The sun caught her tear-streaked face, and for the first time in weeks, Eli's heart clenched. Not with fear, but with something he hadn't felt in years. Hope. The wind howled louder, flinging grit into his eyes. He coughed, swallowing pain and memories in equal measure. The bounty hunters were nearer now. He could hear the distant jingle of spurs, the faint slap of boots against the parched ground. Time was running out. That he reached down, gripping a worn satchel that had held his life's work. Medicines, herbs, and notes on remedies he had never perfected. With trembling fingers, he opened it, revealing vials lined in neat rows. One remained, sealed with wax, containing a potent, last-resort tonic he had brewed for emergencies he had never hoped to encounter. The girl collapsed before him, coughing so violently it rattled her tiny frame. Dust rose around her like a shroud. Eli dragged himself forward, his knees burning, his hands trembling. He held the vial out. "Here," he rasped. No words of comfort, no pleading, only the weight of his gaze, heavy with urgency. Her eyes lifted, wide and terrified, and for a moment the world stilled. She understood, not with words but with instinct. Her hand reached for the vial, and Eli let it slide into her grasp. The simple act felt like a bridge spanning centuries of pain and solitude. A distant rumble echoed through the plains. The hunters closing in. Eli leaned back against the scorched fence post, sweat and blood mingling in streaks across his face. He knew he would not outrun them, but as he watched the girl clutch the vial, something inside him shifted. For the first time since the plague had taken his family, he felt, not regret, but purpose. The sky darkened. Clouds rolled over the sun like a tide of shadow. Dust devils twisted and leaped across the horizon. Eli's breathing grew ragged. Pain gnawed at his ribs, sharp and insistent. He reached into the pocket of his coat and pulled out a faded photograph of his wife and child, burned at the edges. He pressed it to his chest, letting the memory burn him, reminding him of why he could not let this life slip away too. The girl stumbled to her feet, leaning on the satchel for support. Her eyes locked with his, wide with both fear and understanding. A bond, unspoken yet undeniable, formed in that fleeting moment. A pact made not with words, but with shared survival. Eli rose slowly, each movement a struggle against the gnawing weakness in his limbs. He could hear the hunters now, the crunch of boots against stone and dirt, the metallic jingle of their weapons. His jaw tightened. There would be no running, not for him. But maybe, just maybe, there could be life after him. He raised a hand, shielding his eyes against the storm-lit horizon. The wind tugged at his coat, the ashes of the world swirling around him like ghosts. Somewhere beyond a ridge, the girl's small figure vanished briefly behind a drift of dust. Eli's lips curled into a faint, almost imperceptible smile. He had done what he could. The rest would be left to fate, to the unforgiving winds, to the untamed wilderness that had shaped him. And as the first flashes of lightning split the sky, he knew his time was short. But the girl, clutching his last medicine, had a chance. A chance to live, to carry forward a spark he could no longer protect. The wind howled. The dust stung his eyes. Eli fell to his knees, his vision blurring. And then, through the roar of the approaching storm, a small, fragile voice whispered, "Thank you." No words could follow. He could only watch, breathing shallow, as the girl disappeared into the wind, carrying with her the last fragment of his purpose. And above, the clouds churned, lightning flashing, marking the beginning of a storm that would test both the living and the dying. Absolutely. Here's Chapter 2, The Stranger in the Smoke, crafted in the same cinematic, emotionally immersive style. This continues the tension, introduces a mysterious ally, and deepens the emotional stakes. Chapter 2, The Stranger in the Smoke. The storm had arrived. Lightning forked across the sky, turning the jagged cliffs into black silhouettes against the furious light. Rain fell in heavy sheets, drumming on the scorched earth and washing ash into the dry riverbeds. Eli stumbled through the mud, each step a battle against exhaustion, his chest heaving, his coat soaked through and clinging to his bones. Behind him, the distant clang of spurs and shouts marked the hunter's relentless pursuit. They were fast and merciless, but Eli no longer ran for himself. The girl, the one fragile flame, was ahead. She had disappeared behind a ridge of jagged rocks, moving with surprising speed, her small frame swallowed briefly by the rain and fog. The wilderness had become a living adversary. Mud clung to boots, and lightning illuminated unseen crevices where snakes and scorpions lay in wait. A river swollen by rain rushed violently over stones, its current eager to claim the unwary. Eli paused, chest burning, the vial still clenched tightly in his pocket. He had taught himself survival, yet the frontier had a cruel sense of humor. Now it tested him in every way possible. Then, through the haze of rain and smoke, he saw a figure emerge, a tall, broad-shouldered man, leaning against a fallen tree as though waiting. His coat was black, weathered, and streaked with mud. His face, without explanation, night had swallowed the plains. The sky was a deep, bruised violet, pierced by scattered stars that flickered like distant promises. The wind had softened, but the chill remained, crawling through layers of tattered fabric and worn leather. The cowboy kept moving, his boots crunching over dry soil, eyes scanning the horizon. He had never been this far from the remnants of civilization, and every shadow seemed to hold a secret he feared to uncover. The woman moved beside him, silent and steady. Her bare feet made almost no sound, yet each step seemed to anchor her firmly in the earth. The bundle she carried was gone now, left behind in a hollowed log where it would stay safe until morning. She glanced at him once, a fleeting acknowledgement, and he realized he had begun to rely on her presence more than he cared to admit. Hours passed, and the night stretched endlessly. The sound of distant hooves returned intermittently, sometimes closer, sometimes fading into the void. They were being hunted, whether by men, by fate, or by their own pasts. It didn't matter. Every rustle in the brush, Every snapping twig felt like a warning. "Why are you helping me?" the cowboy asked finally, his voice low and rough, breaking the silence that had settled between them. The woman didn't answer immediately. She kept her eyes on the horizon, where the first hints of a distant ridge cut into the sky. Finally, she spoke, her tone even almost detached. "Because I know what it's like to run." That simple sentence carried a weight that pressed against his chest. He thought of the villages burned, the lives lost, the faces he could never forget. And yet, in her calm, he sensed a strength that mirrored his own buried will to survive. They crested a small rise, and the plains opened before them in an endless expanse of shadow and moonlight. A river gleamed far below, winding through the land like a silver snake. Water meant life, meant rest, but it also meant exposure. And they had no time to rest. Suddenly, movement flickered along the edge of the riverbank. A figure emerged, ragged, limping, yet determined. The cowboy's hand went instinctively to his revolver, but the woman raised a hand. She stepped forward slowly, a subtle invitation, and the figure paused. It was an old man, shoulders bent, face lined with scars of sun and survival. He carried nothing but a long walking stick in the shadow of countless battles. His eyes, sharp and wary, scanned them, settling last on the woman. "You seek shelter?" he asked, his voice gravelly but not unkind. The woman nodded once, curtly. "For a moment. Then we move." The old man studied them, then gestured to a cluster of rocks nearby that formed a natural cave. "It will hold the wind, not the cold, not the ghosts." They followed him, each step measured, silent, the weight of unspoken history pressing against them. Inside the cave, the wind was muffled, though the cold still seeped through the cracks in the stone. The old man struck a flint, and a small fire sparked to life, casting flickering shadows that danced across the walls. The cowboy sat, letting exhaustion drag him down, though he kept his revolver close. He watched the woman kneel near the fire, her eyes reflecting the flames as she tended to it with careful hands. The quiet between them was not uncomfortable. It was a rare kind of understanding, born of shared danger and mutual need. Hours passed. The fire crackled, small sparks rising to meet the ceiling. The old man watched them, saying nothing, yet his presence carried a sense of protection, of guidance without intrusion. The cowboy felt something unfamiliar, relief. Not safety, not yet, but a temporary reprieve from the weight of constant vigilance. As the night deepened, memories began to surface. The cowboy saw flashes of his past, the first village he had lost, the screams of those he couldn't save, the faces of friends turned enemies. He tried to push them away, tried to focus on the fire, on the woman, on survival. But memories had a way of returning, persistent and unyielding. The woman sensed his unrest. She placed a hand lightly on his shoulder, almost a gesture, almost a warning. "The past isn't gone," she said softly, "but it doesn't have to follow you into the next step." He looked at her, surprised at the gentleness in her voice, the quiet wisdom that seemed to anchor her to the earth. He wanted to speak, to argue, to dismiss it, but words failed him. Silence became their language. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying the faint echo of hooves, the promise of pursuit. They knew that rest would be brief, that dawn would bring more than sunlight. It would bring the hunt, the choices, the reckoning. The old man finally spoke, his voice cutting through the tension. You're not the only ones running from ghosts. The plains are full of them. But remember, sometimes the ones who follow are only shadows of what you left behind. Not all are real. Some are just memory. The cowboy nodded, understanding more than he could say. The woman glanced at him, her expression unreadable, yet something in her eyes suggested she understood, too. Dawn was slow in coming, creeping like a hesitant predator over the horizon. When it arrived, the light was pale, almost colorless, painting the world in shades of gray and silver. They emerged from the cave, moving with caution, alert to every sound, every movement. The river glistened below, a promise and a risk intertwined. The journey continued, each step heavy with the weight of unseen watchers and unspoken questions. The cowboy's hand lingered near his revolver, yet he felt a strange sense of companionship he had not known in years. The Apache woman walked beside him, steady, a living reminder that survival was not just about escaping danger. It was about finding someone who could walk with you through it. And far off, in the hills that marked the edge of the plains, shadows began to gather, dark shapes moving with intent. The hunt would resume soon, but for now, they had a fragile moment of peace, a fleeting chance to catch their breath, to remember that even in a world full of fire and blood, there could be trust, connection, and perhaps, in time, redemption. The dawn broke slowly over the plains, the sky streaked with orange and pale violet. A quiet tension hung in the air, heavier than a morning fog. The rancher stood at the edge of the property, eyes scanning the horizon. The Apache had been awake for hours, moving with quiet purpose, their faces focused and alert. Something had shifted overnight, a subtle sense of foreboding, a ripple of danger that neither he nor the elders could ignore. The herd grazed cautiously, sensing the unease that clung to the wind. Birds scattered from the trees, startled by an unseen presence. The rancher's hand rested on the worn handle of his revolver, not in anticipation of confrontation, but as a reminder that survival was never guaranteed. Life had taught him that lesson too many times. By midday, the threat became unmistakable. A small group of men, rough and armed, appeared over the rise of a distant hill. Their eyes were hard, their faces lined with greed and suspicion. Word had traveled across the plains. There were newcomers at the ranch, and some had decided they wanted the land for themselves. The rancher's chest tightened. He had faced hostility before, and he knew that words alone would not deter them. The Apache moved with him, silent and deliberate. Each gesture, each glance, was a plan without spoken commands. The rancher realized that this moment was more than a test of strength. It was a test of trust, of the bonds that had formed quietly in the shadows of hardship. The first clash was sudden. Dust exploded as hooves struck the earth, a swirl of motion and chaos. Guns fired, echoing across the plains. The rancher ducked behind a fence post, feeling the sting of dirt and splintered wood against his skin. The Apache moved like shadows, precise and fearless, protecting the young and guiding the animals to safer ground. Amid the chaos, the rancher saw the faces of the attackers. Hardened men who had no patience for kindness, no memory of loss, no capacity for understanding. But he also saw the faces of the Apache, calm in the storm, eyes steady, movements purposeful. And in that instant, he understood the meaning of the trust that had grown in silence. Hours passed like this, a blur of dust, shouts, and the relentless sun beating down. By late afternoon, the attackers had retreated, some wounded, others defeated, leaving the ranch scarred but intact. The rancher stood in the center of the chaos, breathing heavily, the weight of exhaustion pressing on his shoulders. Around him, the Apache tended to their own, helping the injured, checking the animals, rebuilding fences torn in the battle. It was then, in the quiet aftermath, that the true test emerged. A small child, the youngest of the group, had wandered toward the edge of the property, drawn by curiosity, oblivious to danger. The rancher's instincts flared, and he sprinted forward, scooping the child into his arms just as a wounded horse stumbled nearby. For a heartbeat, the world paused. Wind cutting across the plains, sun glinting off dust, silence heavy with meaning. He held the child close, feeling the warmth of life and the fragility of it all. Tears streaked his dirt-smeared face, and he realized that the walls he had built around his heart had finally come down. Not through words, not through grand gestures, but through the quiet, persistent presence of those who had trusted him, and whom he had come to trust in return. Evening fell, painting the sky in deep reds and purples. The rancher and the Apache gathered around the fire, tending to wounds, sharing small comforts, and reflecting in silence. The youngest child drew another sketch, this time of the rancher and the Apache standing together, the storm behind them, and the plains stretching endlessly forward. The image was simple, yet it held a profound truth. Survival was no longer solitary, and hope, once a flicker, was now steady. But the night also brought loss. One of the elders, a quiet figure who had guided them with wisdom, did not rise from the barn. The rancher felt the weight of grief pressing down, sharp and unrelenting. He knelt beside the man, closing his eyes in respect, feeling the finality of life and the importance of memory. Not all battles ended with victory. Not all hearts survived the storm and the quiet hours. The rancher wandered the property, touching the fences, the barn, the ground, and the wind that carried whispers of the past. He thought of those he had lost, of mistakes he could not undo, of lives he could not save. And yet he also thought of those who remained, of the fragile bonds that had formed, and of a life rebuilt from ashes. Dawn arrived again, soft and golden, and the rancher stood on the porch, looking out over the plains. The herd grazed peacefully, the Apache moved through the land with purpose, and the sky stretched infinitely above them. He felt the weight of scars and survival, the quiet satisfaction of trust earned and shared, and the undeniable truth that even in a world of loss and hardship, life, resilient and persistent, could still flourish. He lifted a hand to the horizon, a silent vow to the land, to the people who had come into his life, and to the memory of those he had loved and lost. This was not an ending, nor a beginning, but a continuation, a fragile, enduring testament to the power of connection, courage, and resilience. And as the wind whispered across the plains, carrying the voices of life and memory, he felt it. The ember of hope, steady and bright, burning in the heart of the man who had learned that even the loneliest soul could find a family, even in the most desolate place. If this story touched you, if you've ever carried a wound the world couldn't see, leave a comment below. Let your story be heard. And remember, even in the darkest valley, a single ember can light the way.